This is Kathryn Goetzke, host of the Hope Matrix podcast. We are here to share science, stories, and strategies for how to hope. I'm the Chief Hope Officer of the Shine Hope Company, and Shine is the mnemonic for how we teach hope. So when we talk about hope, we talk about how we use stress skills, happiness habits, inspired actions, nourishing networks, and eliminating challenges, which are our thinking patterns that get in the way of our ability to hope. Hope is a skill. You can measure hope, you can teach hope, and you can start practicing skills to activate higher hope in your life today. And on this Hope Matrix podcast, we aim to bring in guests, experts in science, people with stories, and those that have strategies for activating hope in your life.
Well, hello, everyone, all the listeners. So grateful to have you here today for the Hope Matrix podcast. Really appreciate you taking time to learn more about hope and strategies for how to shine hope in your life. Today we have Dr. Christy Oaks with us on the podcast. That's Christy with a Y. So for all those listening in, I'm really grateful to have Christy here to share her expertise and some of her own journey and shine hope skills. So first of all, I want to welcome you to the podcast, Dr. Christy. Thank you so much for joining today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kathryn. I'm so happy and excited and nervous to be here.
Oh, amazing. I know. I was terrified when I did my first podcast, and now I just get used to it. And then I listen to myself and I think I shouldn't listen to myself. But no, I'm really grateful. It takes such courage to share stories live, especially when it's personal to us.
Yeah.
It does. And yeah, I think it's the only way we all grow. And I think when we share stories, it can make it so much easier for the next person. If, we share it with intention and with some of the strategies we use. I talk a lot about how I struggled so much as a youth and in my 20s. And so much of the Shine framework I used was the negative kind of turning to addictions and self-harm and all of these things that were actually making everything worse for me and for my life. And so by sharing skills and your story of things that you've gone through and how you navigate it, and the healthy tools we use, the ones that we know are kind of backed by science, I'm really grateful. As you are a doctor too, so
Yeah.
So that's amazing. Why don't we start? Can you just share a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah. So my doctorate is in counselor education and supervision. I just graduated this year.
Awesome. Congrats.
Thanks. I did my dissertation study on the experiences of counselor educators and supervisors that identify within the queer community, their experiences of power, privilege, and oppression in higher education, which was a really, really cool study. I'm a huge nature lover, and I'm currently doing a nature-based therapy certificate at East Tennessee State University. Since, I graduated my PhD, now I have to find something else to do.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess a little on the more personal side, I am someone who lives with a severe bleeding disorder that had a huge impact on the way I navigate my life. And I know you share a little bit about your childhood and early life experiences. I have an ACEs score of 6, and my family also experienced homelessness for the first 11 years of my life. Thankfully, we had a family member that let us live with them, but it was a pretty severe hoarding situation. So just not the healthiest environment. And yeah, now I work as a clinic director and a clinical instructor in higher education, and as a counselor too.
Wow, that's amazing. Good for you. Yeah, and to all the listeners that don't know, ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. So what we go through, and you can get up to a score of 10. So I think it's anything 4 and a higher is challenging. So I'm definitely higher on the ACEs score as well. And it can come from all kinds of things. What we know is that those higher in ACEs are going to be higher in hopelessness, our moments of hopelessness. And I think so much of what I learned in life was, even though I came from a great family, but losing my dad to suicide at 18, and a lot of the things I learned were kind of around hopelessness, around getting stuck in that persistent state of hopelessness. And, we know it's also very high in the LGBTQ community. Hopelessness is often a consequence of oppression, discrimination. And so again, when you look at hopelessness being both despair, so you feel like emotional despair and then motivational helplessness, so powerlessness to do anything about it, of course, you're going to be higher in hopelessness. And so it's really about being proactive about our hope, not saying it's easy at all, but, learning and working together to cultivate hope in our lives and to learn how to hope and really where our locus of control is in that hope. And so, yes, I'm really grateful to you for sharing today and being willing to be open. Again, it's, we learn through other people. And when we don't, we can go through, so many unnecessary challenges. And I think that, my addictions were just a way to suit my stress response. And had I learned at a young age some of these, or had I learned from people that have gone through it before me as well, that would have been really helpful. So thank you for being here and for being honest about how you're feeling. Yeah,
Of course.
it's always an adventure. I used to be terrified of public speaking, literally terrified. And I realized that what I was doing was I was activating my stress response because I get in my head and I think, oh, I've got to say this. And then I'd stop breathing. And as soon as you stop breathing, it just triggers it even more and more and more. And I'd get into this panic state. So I'm grateful that I've worked hard to get to a place where I can do a podcast. So yes, yeah, maybe you'll have your own someday too.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but I can relate with that with getting up in front of a classroom and teaching. Like the first time I did that, that was very scary, but now it's just like, oh, hey, this is me. I'm awkward and I say words wrong, and this is just who I am.
Yes, that's awesome. We must embrace that. The
Hmm.
earlier, the better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why don't you talk more about your experiences? So you mentioned a bleeding disorder.
Mhm.
What does that even mean?
So, it's actually pretty common in the United States. Just most people have a very mild form and don't know that they have the bleeding disorder. But what I have is called von Willebrand's disorder. And I have type 2A severe. And so what that means for me is that in my blood, everyone has, well, not everyone. If you have a bleeding disorder or issues with your blood, then you don't have this. But there's a von Willebrand factor in your blood, and that's part of the clotting agent for whenever you get a cut or a bruise. That goes in and it helps your cells stick together so that you can form a clot. Mine are misshapen, and so they don't stick together like they should. So the average person, if they were to get, like, say, a cat scratch, on average, someone without a bleeding disorder would stop bleeding within like 7 minutes. The last time they did a timed test on me to see how long it would take for me to stop bleeding, they stopped after 45 minutes because my blood just was not clotting. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it has a huge impact on like everything in my life. And, I was born assigned female at birth. So that heavily impacted my menstrual cycle. So from the time I started my cycle, I was in and out of the hospital, getting blood transfusions and medications to try and help stop the bleeding. But it was just like one time when I was 13, that entire year, I bled every single day. Yeah.
Wow. And I mean, what are the physical, like you lightheaded all the, I mean, could you do anything? Could you?
Well, so von Willebrand's affects the soft tissues. So like when I was really young, I would have like really severe nosebleeds and it would take several hours for them to stop. And that was not fun for a kid who had undiagnosed ADHD, having to sit still while my mom holds my nose for a nosebleed.
Oh my gosh.
And I bruise really easy. So at the time when I was younger, there was actually an investigation into my family for child abuse because I had bruises just from my parents picking me up out of the crib. But during that time with the heavy bleeding from my menstrual cycle, I was just anemic all the time. So very, very low energy, had to move really slow. There was a couple of times where I actually passed out from the blood loss. Um, yeah. So just
Wow.
exhaustion.
Yeah. Yeah. And here you sit today with a PhD.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of a miracle that I'm still alive.
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing. So share more about what were the stressors? So I'll kind of walk through the SHINE framework if that's okay with you, and you could just share how you navigated. Is there anything else specifically you want to talk about throughout this?
Um, no, I feel like the bleeding disorder has been one of the biggest challenges I've had in my life. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then if you're in a higher in ACEs score, you're not equipped with a lot of the skills. And I mean, for me, being really reactive, very emotionally, reactive to things. So we're very fast trigger. I get triggered by something, and it's been a real process for me to learn. But thanks to neuroplasticity, you can rewire your brain through these practices, through all of them, which is amazing. So, yeah. And I actually, you go by she, her, correct?
She, they.
She, they, sorry. Got it. So you were assigned female at birth, you said. And can you explain more to our listeners what that means, she, they?
So it's gender identity is unique to every individual. For me, I do not identify as cisgender. And so for listeners, cisgender means that your gender identity aligns with the sex assigned at birth. So if you were assigned female at birth and you resonate with being female and femininity and you identify as a female, then you would be cisgender. Um, for me, it kind of depends on the day as how I identify. So usually I'll just say I identify as gender fluid or gender queer. And for me, that just means I don't resonate with identifying as female or resonate with femininity all the time. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It really just ebbs and flows and depends on the day. So there are some days she, her pronouns feel fine. And there are other days it feels like I need to come out of my skin because that's not me.
Got it. Thank you so much. Yeah. And we're going to do a whole episode on that. I think it's so important. And what people fear, they often are against. And so being open about it and just helping understand is really, yeah, I'm really grateful for that. So, and I'm sure that adds a whole other complexity to everything you navigate. Um,
Definitely it I feel like it and the bleeding disorder and how it impacted my menstrual cycle, they go together. They're like married.
got it. Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk more about stressors, triggers, stress skills. Again, our stress response, when we're triggered by things, we have this flooding of chemicals in our body, norepinephrine, adrenaline, and cortisol, and they keep us in our downstairs brain, and we can't think and collaborate and problem solve and, be in a necessarily hopeful place. I say we have to use our sadness, our anger, or fear as indicators. We don't want to run from them. We want to address them, listen to them, learn from them, and then work to get back, navigate our way back into our upstairs brain. That's what we talk to a lot of kids about that. So I can imagine there's a million things that are stressors for you in life and that have been. And every time, I mean, if you have a bleeding disorder, every time you potentially are cut or anything happens, that's a trigger, I would imagine. So can you talk more about the triggers and kind of what you do to navigate them?
You would think every time I would get cut or bump into something that would be a trigger, but it's just so much part of my norm that it's honestly not. Like it's almost, and maybe this is very, very privileged for me to say within the bleeding disorder community, but I've had a hysterectomy. And so since the hysterectomy, it's almost like I sometimes forget that I have a bleeding disorder because that was where all my symptoms came from. So for me, the triggers are more of like when a student on campus sees me and assumes that I'm a person who has a menstrual cycle and asks me if I have a tampon or a pad. That for me is a trigger because it makes me feel really weirdly uncomfortable. Or if people ask if I have children or when I'm going to have children or why don't I have children, those are big triggers for me. But it's not so much the day-to-day stuff, more as like the specific to the menstrual cycle stuff.
Got it. Got it. And how do you navigate them? How do you navigate the triggers?
Depends on the day. Depends on the day and it depends on the trigger.
Right, right. Yeah. And do you realize in your body when you're getting triggered by things?
it takes me a minute to get there,
Yeah.
to realize what's happening because I tend to be so in my head,
Yeah.
and getting in touch with my body takes a lot of intentional effort for me.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. I know. And when you grow up in trauma or any kind of, you become, yeah, almost protected against those triggers somewhat. You develop this kind of a barrier. You can, so that you don't, everything doesn't affect you. So it took me as well a long time to really get in touch with how am I feeling? What is triggering me? I wore a leaf, which measures HRV in the real time, and it would start vibrating when it noticed I was triggered. And I was like, I'm triggered. And then I would realize, oh, I'm reading an email and this is triggering me. So even getting in touch with the triggers, yeah, is so important. And to me, it's such an important step of hope because until you start really understanding when you're triggered, what triggers you, how it's triggering you, what it makes you feel, and then how you navigate it, you're going to have challenges because when you react, when you're in those triggered places, we do really do things that are very harmful for us. So, yeah, so it's a process for you, I'm hearing.
Yes, very much so. I feel like my mental health has a big impact on that too, which we're kind of talking about already. Um, but so I have several diagnoses, but I feel like my depression and my anxiety are like they have a huge impact on how I navigate my life. And so there will be days where like everything's fine, but as the days start getting shorter and there's less time that I can spend outside comfortably, not that there's any kind of bad weather, just not preparedness. Um, it has a big impact on my, I guess, depression or even seasonal affective disorder.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Absolutely. So how do you navigate? Like, what do you do for your stressors? How do you?
Yep. Um, so I do a lot of gardening.
You do awesome.
Yeah. Yes, I'm very much like a chaos/cottage gardener. Um, I like going on nature walks, just being outside. I love doing sit spots. Are you familiar with what a sit spot is?
Not. No. Do
I,
tell.
they're like my favorite way to start the day. But it's just going out in nature and finding a place that you can sit and be comfortable and just sit in silence and just notice the nature beings around you. See if they have any like messages to offer you, or if you can find any reflections of what's going on in your world that can give you like information or hope. And I'll usually do that practice for at least 15 minutes, but it always ends up turning into like 30 or 45 minutes because I love it. But I'll go outside in the mornings, I'll have my tea, and I'll just sit in my garden and just watch the birds, look at the insects, see the new blooms.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, I mean, you brought up the weather, but it's challenging to do that then when you get crazy weather. And so I feel like we have to be really creative about what stress skills we use and how we kind of replicate that or in what way. I saw a lot of that in COVID. If we stop doing our stress skills or our happiness habits, we can, develop a clinical anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder. And so for me, I've had to get really creative about the stress skills I'm using, especially when I all of a sudden lose access to them or can't do them anymore for whatever reason. I have to figure out another way to manage my stress hormones that's healthy for me. You used to manage it with smoking or drinking or just things that would take those moments away, but that weren't healthy for me. And so, yeah, learning. So how are you doing that? How are you replacing that? Are you in a cold area, cold climate, or?
Yeah, it actually snowed today. We had a 2-hour snow delay. So that was nice. Yeah. So weirdly, I like being outside when it's cold.
Uh-huh.
Like I like being able to put the layers on.
Yeah.
So I will still go outside. I don't spend nearly as much time though. But I also have a lot of house plants to like take care of inside. So honestly, I'll just walk around my house looking at all my different house plants to check on them and see how they're doing. So
Yeah.
that's one thing that I do. I also I'll do some tapping or yoga or some meditation. I like to crochet.
Oh, very beautiful.
Yeah, that's kind of meditative. I did.
Nice. That's impressive. Yes, it's very meditative.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah. And so when I think about anxiety, I think about, for me, it was just my fear response and I get into that fear response. And so my stress skills help me navigate my fear response. And now I'm very aware of it and very intentional about it. So that I'm
Mhm.
constantly, it's just constantly navigating my fear response with stress skills. And really the same thing with happiness habits. Getting serotonin. Our bodies can produce serotonin, dopamine, these positive, happy hormones. And so it's learning how to manufacture them within our bodies, how to the best of our ability, endorphins. And so how do you do that?
I will say I think practicing gratitude makes a world of difference for me because it's really easy for me to, see the people I graduated high school with, like they have children that are like getting ready to graduate high school or starting to drive. And I'm like, I have two cats and a dog. Yeah. And so I try to reframe that in my mind to be grateful for the fact that, I am still alive. I'm still here. I'm giving back to the community through the clinic that I direct. I'm able to help the future generations of counselors. And by that, I'm able to help more clients in that way. And so, yeah, just focusing on the things that I'm really grateful for in my life,
Yeah.
especially the fur babies.
Yeah, they're awesome. I have a dog myself. It's amazing. Yeah, and even smiling releases endorphins, and I know I used to get so annoyed by some of the research and literature. I'd like just smile, but it really, like, we have to produce these happiness hormones. It really does impact how we feel, and I can tell when I'm really low in them, and I have to do even more things on that, happy hormone. We're just like researching what can we do to kind of create these happiness hormones within ourselves that maybe doesn't cost money that anyone can do anywhere. And there are so many creative ways to do it. So what do you have any other suggestions or tips?
So for me, trying to make myself smile without there being like a something to prompt the smile is really difficult. And so I will try to intentionally listen to music that I know will make me smile or laugh. And so anything that Alvin and the Chipmunks sing always makes me laugh.
What's that?
Um, but this is gonna sound so silly, but one of my favorite songs to listen to when I'm feeling down is do you remember Weird Al and how he would make parody music?
Uh,
He made a parody song for Star Wars. And that song, like every time I hear it, like I can't not be happy when I hear that song because I just love it.
right, right.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And it's so hard because it's when we're unhappy, we don't want manufacture, or we don't when we're in, it's hard. And it does help us to feel better and to get back to a healthier place where we can make better decisions and work to fix challenges we have or,
Yeah.
problems. So yeah, it's super important. What about the I as inspired actions? Do you set goals?
I tend to do more like visualization slash manifestation. So trying to like visualize things going well. And I know there's some research that shows like visualizing can be really, really powerful.
Yes.
And so I try to tap into that and like, yeah, that's usually what I do.
Awesome. Yeah, visualization. And one of the studies I just interviewed, or actually Dr. Diane Dreher did, on hope, is that if you visualize something and then you see a challenge or an obstacle, visualize the obstacle and visualize yourself overcoming the obstacle, like coming up with a solution and then visualizing another obstacle and seeing another solution. You're actually more likely to achieve, like it boosts your hope score and it makes you more likely to achieve whatever you're visualizing. So I think that's kind of a fun little practice. You usually visualize, but you don't really see challenges along the way. And then it's with people, once they run into these challenges, they kind of give up and they lose hope. But if
Mm.
you build kind of self-efficacy, a belief, well, I can overcome these challenges. And that's too one of the reasons we do the Shine Hope stories. We share how people overcome challenges that nobody, that people think you can't overcome and share how other people have overcome them. And even by writing your own shine hope stories so that you can say, I've done hard things in the past. I've overcome challenges in the past. So this is a new challenge, but I'm equipped with some skills. I know that I can do things that are hard, is another kind of hope booster. So what about specific to your bleeding disorder? What did you have to do to like get to doctors? I mean, what specific things did you have to do to get a handle on it, to get to a place where, you can be out in society? I just think if I had it, I'd be scared to, I mean, if you trip and fall and you're out playing a game or something and you don't have anyone around or traveling remotely or just any of those things, I don't know. So what?
Yeah. Um, God, my mind just went like, will you ask that again?
Yeah, no, what are the specific steps? So you found out at what age were you when you found out you had the bleeding disorder?
Okay, gotcha. I remember your question now. So I found out I was 12 or 13. And my very, very first period was 7 days long. The second one was like 25 days long, and I ended up being hospitalized because I lost so much blood. I had lost like over half my body's worth of blood in those 25 days. So it took a lot of work with my hematologist as well as an OBGYN. And they started me out taking one birth control that didn't work. Then they upped to two birth control that didn't work. And then they added progesterone. And that, I mean, it worked-ish because for the next like few years, I would be in and out of the hospital. I would have, like I said earlier, like a period that lasted for an entire year. And so with that medication that I was taking, I had to take it at 9:00 p.m. every single day, never taking a placebo. And if I was even 15 minutes late, then I would have a hemorrhage where I would more than likely end up back in the hospital. And the medication to treat when I have a severe bleed is intravenous, and it has to be given every 6 hours. And it costs around $20,000 per time you receive the medication. So it's staggeringly expensive. Um, so yeah, yes, that was
Crazy.
that was a big part of all of that, was just like I lived by the clock. And if it was 9:00, I had to have my medicine and take it right then and there. And if I didn't, then
Yeah.
it was going to be a problem in a few days.
So how did you remember?
It, so back then I knew it was life or death. I knew if I didn't take this, then there was going to be some really horrible consequences, and it was not worth it. And plus my mom helped me remember a lot of when to take it. And it just became this like natural habit of like, intuitively, I would just know it was 9:00 and that I need to look at the clock and then go get my medicine.
Yeah.
Now, that's not the case. I can enjoy like, oh, oops, I need to take my medicine and I'm okay. I'm not going to die.
Yeah.
But back then it really was just survival.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you have to do the intravenous stuff?
Um,
Remember?
anytime I was hospitalized, I did. Anytime I had to have surgery, I would have to have the intravenous stuff like, gosh, my memory fails me sometimes, but I think it was like 2 or 3 days before the surgery. And then for, 2 weeks after the surgery, just to make sure that my body healed and that there weren't any breakthrough bleeds. And so, throughout my life, I've had 4 or 5 surgeries. And so, yeah, and that's still the case now. If I were to need another surgery or if I were to be in like a serious wreck and I had internal bleeding, then that would be the medication that they would need to give me.
Got it. Do they know? Is it somewhere you have to wear a bracelet or something that tells people that?
I do. I wear a medical alert bracelet all the time. And so that way people will know. Back in the day, they didn't keep that medication. It's called Humate-P. Not every hospital kept it in stock. And so there was, when I was in like I was 19 or 18, my appendix became infected and I had to have it removed. And we couldn't do the surgery as soon as I needed because we were waiting on that medication. And while we were waiting for that hospital to receive that medication from another hospital, my appendix ruptured. Yeah, it was just not a good time. And so that was another like barrier to access for that life-saving medication for me so that I could receive the treatment I needed.
Wow. Yeah. So now it's now standard in all hospitals.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Got
The
it.
last time I had surgery, it was like I remember the pharmacist for the hospital actually came to my room to introduce himself to me and my partner, because he was hand delivering the medication because it was so expensive and so rare. And so
Uh,
I don't think most people have that experience with their medication when they're in the hospital.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you pay for all the treatments? I mean, it sounds,
Yeah. So when I turned 18, I incurred a lot of medical debt that my parents had not been able to pay.
yeah.
And then at another point, I didn't have insurance. And so I incurred more medical debt. And I actually ended up having to file medical bankruptcy because I couldn't afford the astronomical costs.
No. I mean,
Yeah.
so many people do. That's like such a big challenge
Yeah.
for folks in the US. Yeah. And then that's a whole nother layer of, challenges and stressors and kind of all of these things. So, well, it's amazing. I mean, that you're, again, you graduated with a PhD, you've gone through all this, it's taking one step, putting one step in front of the other and continuing to work to kind of solve the challenges that as they come up. Uh, yeah. How is your blood condition now? How do you feel? I mean, is it still pretty,
I mean, it's still like if I were to get cut, it's going to take a while for it to stop bleeding. And I have to, like this time of the year, I have to be really like intentional about my nosebleeds because they can be pretty bad now too. But for the most part, as long as, knock on wood, I don't get into any accidents like while I'm driving or like there's no like severe impact on my body, I'd say I go through life pretty normal, just a little bit more hyper vigilant than someone who maybe doesn't have a bleeding disorder.
yeah, makes sense. And what about your network? So who is in your network and has been supportive for you throughout this process throughout your life?
So um I've had a lot of really wonderful friends that, as friendships do, they ebb and flow, but I've had some friends that have really been there for me. Like when I had my hysterectomy, I had one friend that didn't leave me. I had another friend that stayed with my mom during the surgery. And so they were really wonderful people. We're all busy and our lives have drifted. So I don't get to see or connect with them as often, but I still hold them in a really like special place in my heart. I would say my nourishing network right now is honestly my fur babies are definitely in that network because they're like the best wellness thing ever for me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I-
my partner, and then I've got some friends too that they feed my soul.
Oh, yeah, it's amazing. We were talking earlier, I was in another conversation about how it takes effort to make friends, to keep connected with friends,
Yeah.
and as we're busy in life, it can become more challenging. And as we go through transitions, sometimes our friends need to change and we need to be intentional about making those connections. And our friends and our families and all of those people can let us down. And so it's important that we also have a connection to something and somewhat. And fur babies are awesome. You know, I have a dog, and no matter what anyone thinks of me, my dog is always my biggest fan. Just, great. It's amazing to have that. And it's great. There's so much research around it. I love how all the evidence is finally coming out about a lot of what we knew all along around what kind of cultivates our hope. So, and pets and animals are definitely one of them. So that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the E in our shine is eliminating challenges. And this is kind of a hodgepodge of everything our brain does to like get in the way of it's our rumination, it's our worry, it's our internalizing failure, it's our trying to control things outside of our control, it's our biases. just all of these things. So can you talk, what are your biggest challenges you identify? I mean, all of them, not, I mean,
All of them?
I know exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I know we always say like we're our own worst critic.
We are.
And oh my gosh, I definitely am. I think I will be harsher and meaner to myself than anyone else ever possibly could be.
Little.
Yeah. So those automatic negative thoughts that I have, they are a huge challenge. And with them comes the rumination and the worry and the internalizing and taking everything personally. And yeah, it's been a great opportunity to unlearn those patterns, to try to unlearn those patterns and try to give myself some of that kindness and compassion and grace that I give to most everyone else that I ever meet. Um, but yeah, it's hard to give it to myself.
Yeah. And I think even the awareness of that and becoming aware of that is such an important part of the process. Do you use affirmations at all?
I actually do like mantras in my mind. And so whenever those thoughts start coming in, because a lot of the thoughts also like, for me, it's almost like if I experience any kind of conflict or anything that feels like I feel like I'm being attacked, even though that's probably not what's happening. For me growing up, if there was conflict, it was a life or death situation usually. And so now I almost interpret conflict as life or death. And so for me, I have to do the mantra, I am safe, I'm calm, I'm protected. And like saying that to myself and visualizing as well. Like when I say I'm grounded, I visualize roots coming out of the bottom of my spine and going down into the earth. And when I say I am protected, I visualize like just this um like bubble of like energy and light that surrounds me, that protects me. And so the mantra and the visualization, it seems to really help to ground me and bring me back to the moment and realize there's no life or death situation here. You just forgot to do this thing.
Kind of okay. Yeah, that's awesome that you found something that works. And, different things work for different people. So I always say explore what works for you, the mantras, affirmations, touching the 5 4 3 2 1 where touch notes, something, have a practice so you can work to, because we're in our minds. And when we get back into the present moment, it's usually everything's okay in the present. It's in our minds that it's not okay. And so, and just even learning what our brain does to kind of trick us into these states, and how to intervene, and that we are not our thoughts. We are observing our thoughts. So I love Michael Singer. He's really some inspiration for some of this work. So yeah, that's awesome. And so that's how you shine. So I love that. Also helpful. I wonder if we could just chat for a few minutes about a conversation I had earlier, if you're willing, about, what do we do about, and it's a conversation I have all the time because I go and we speak with different populations, and there are certain populations that are so discriminated against, so marginalized, so high in hopelessness,
Yeah.
and that say, how can I hope? And why should I hope when the systems are, you know, set up this way and, with power and they're not changing?
Hmm.
Um, what do you have any advice or thoughts or, you know, words of wisdom on that from your perspective?
Hmm. As you were saying that, I just kept thinking about institutionalized racism and how, yeah, just how that impacts BIPOC communities. And also, I'm thinking about intersectionality and how, like, the different layers of our different identities and how they're layered and how they impact how we navigate the world. Um, and now I'm also thinking about like implicit biases, the biases that a lot of people hold internally that they were learning before they even understood what they were learning or how to think, but they were learning. And so I guess to answer that question, I'm just going to kind of look at it from a micro lens, so just on an individual level. And so perhaps one of the ways we can start to combat that is by inviting people to be more open, to have an honest look at what implicit biases they hold, and not attach those biases to whether or not they're good or bad people, so not threatening their worth or their value, but to be a more critical consumer of their thoughts and their beliefs. And is this thing that I did, that a microaggression that caused harm, is that a symptom of an internal belief that I didn't realize I had? And does that align with my values? And if it doesn't, how can I unpack that? How can I unlearn that? And how can I show up in more authentic ways to support communities that I care deeply about and people that I love? Going to counseling is one way that a lot of people can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's wonderful. I know we all need counselors.
Yes, I love my counselor.
So
very much.
I know. It doesn't mean you're sick or there's something wrong with you. It's such a...
It means you're human.
Exactly. And life is challenging and people can be challenging,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, having that non-biased third party who has total unconditional positive regard for you it's so rare. And I need a lot of people who are like, oh, I tried a therapist and they were no good for me. I didn't like them. I don't want to go back. And I hear that and I understand that. And some people really do have horrible experiences with therapists. And I don't mean to minimize that. And I would like to invite them to consider a metaphor of, like, when you're a kid and you change schools and you're trying to find your new friend group, not every friend group in that school is going to be a good fit. You've got to find the one that's going to be a good fit. And I think it's the same for trying to find a counselor. You got to find the one that's going to be a good fit. And not everybody is going to be a good fit.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I've had them through different periods of my life. Different counselors have served, purposes during different periods of time too. So it's okay to change at some point too, if you want. And
Absolutely.
yeah. And you don't want to wait until you're in time of crisis to go find a therapist. That's not the easiest time to find one that's a good fit because you're in crisis, So you have one in your nourishing network, one on call.
Yeah, I should have added her to my nourishing network. I'm sorry, I forgot that. Yeah, she definitely, she holds space for me when I need it. And I appreciate her very much.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So, any final thoughts or things you want to share, to our listeners, or about your story or tips or?
Oh my gosh. Just to be kind to yourself, give yourself some grace and some kindness, and continue to be open and curious. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining, Christy with a Y, and sharing your story and your journey and your challenges and how you're navigating it in healthy ways. And, hopefully some of our listeners got some skills that they can use in their own lives for similar challenges or different challenges. But as I said, we're better when we share stories and we share what's working and what's not working and learn kind of together. So I'm really grateful. How can people learn more about you? Or is that something you want? Do you?
What's the normal way people learn about other people?
Well, LinkedIn or websites or any of that, if there's,
I do have a LinkedIn. It's under Christine and then in parentheses, Christy with a Y, Oaks.
Awesome.
Yeah, so they can find me on there if they want. Or I do have an Etsy shop where I sell my crochet. If anybody is, you just did. I did. I just started it, and I only have 2 items because another one just sold. But that's a tiny shop. But it's the liminal. It's the liminal nook.
The liminal nook. Wow. Yeah, liminal. Liminal. Oh, yeah, nook. Awesome. That's so cool. We'll get them fast. There's 2. I'm assuming it takes you a while to make them too.
It depends on what it is. The more I do it, the faster I get. So like this
Awesome.
sweater took like 3 or 4 days.
Uh-huh. Wow. That's pretty incredible.
Thank you.
Oh, well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining and sharing your story. It was really wonderful connecting with you,
Thank you. Likewise.
learning more about you. And thanks for going into counseling. You need counselors out there so much. So many people with different challenges and, top in my nourishing network for sure. I'm a therapist. So, and thanks to all you listeners for listening in. Please be sure to share this with others. Spread the message that hope is measurable and teachable, and we've got to be intentional about our hope and practice skills. And our Shine Hope framework provides kind of an evidence-based approach for how we can work on our hope. It's a journey, it's a daily journey. So again, thanks for listening in. And Christy, thank you again for joining us today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks all. Have a great day. Keep shining.
So thank you all for listening in to the Hope Matrix podcast. We want to shine a light that hope is teachable, hope is measurable and teachable, and provide you with actionable insights for how you can start activating hope in your life today, and provide a framework so you can start talking about hope with other people and practice these skills together, because we are better with hope. Please feel free to check out the shinehopecompany.com, where we list all of our resources around how to hope. We have a lot of free programs for how to hope, including the 5-day challenge, our hope infographic with a lot of skills that showcase how to hope, and articles of how to incorporate hope into your life. We have the Hope Beat Weekly, which is a weekly newsletter that shares strategies for hope. We have a My Hope Story template, so you can write your own hope story today. Also, My Hope Heroes, so we can share what our heroes are doing to activate hope in their lives. And this is especially good with youth, so they can start looking up to people that have overcome similar challenges to them and seeing how these heroes use the Shine Hope framework. We have a Hopeful Minds for Teens program, a Hopeful Minds overview, educator guides. We have a new evidence-based college course, so you can activate hope on the college campus. There are programs in the workplace, overview courses, 90-minute courses for learning the what, why, and how to hope. What I want you to know about hope is it's a skill. You've got to practice these skills to become hopeful. It's easy to fall into despair and helplessness when we deal with challenges in life, and it takes intentional work and practice to get to hope. And yet it is always possible. So no matter what life brings, keep shining hope. Thanks so much for listening in. Have an awesome day. And of course, I've got to add that this program is designed to assist you in learning about hope. It should not be used for medical advice, counseling, or other health-related services. I, Fred, the Shine Hope Company, and myself, Kathryn Goetzke, do not endorse or provide any medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I am not a medical doctor. The information provided here should not be used for the diagnosis or treatment of any medical condition, and cannot be substituted for the advice of physicians, licensed professionals, or therapists who are familiar with your specific situation. Consult a licensed medical profession or call 911 if you are in need of immediate assistance. And be sure to know the crisis hotline, 988, if you are in need of support. Thanks a bunch for listening. Take good care of yourself and keep shining hope.